Welcome to the deep dive. Today we're taking a fascinating plunge into Morgan Housel's The Psychology of Money.
Mm-hmm.
You shared this with us because, well, you're looking to go beyond just the formulas and, the spreadsheets of personal finance
Right.
and really understand how our thoughts, our feelings, how they shape our financial lives.
Exactly.
So our mission on this deep dive is kind of to unpack the key insights from the book that will resonate with you, someone who wants to grasp important knowledge quickly and thoroughly.
And maybe enjoys those aha moments.
Yeah, exactly. Those moments and, definitely doesn't want to feel overwhelmed by just tons of information.
Absolutely. We're here to distill the core principles, offer some practical takeaways.
Okay.
It's about uncovering those often invisible psychological forces that, well, drive our financial behaviors.
Right, the hidden stuff. Okay, so to get us thinking, consider this story House tells. It's about a highly successful tech executive
Oh, yeah, I remember this one.
who casually throws gold coins into the ocean, just tosses them.
Seems unbelievable, right?
Totally. But then, just days later, he's absolutely furious about having to pay $500 to replace a broken lamp in his hotel room.
Yeah.
Gold in the sea, trivial. But $500 for a lamp is like an outrage. Okay, let's unpack this because it really highlights the often completely illogical ways we can view and handle money.
It does.
It's almost like money has different emotional weights depending on how we get it or how we perceive it. Is that something Housel gets into?
That's precisely the kind of paradox Housel explores. What's fascinating here is that this anecdote immediately flags the central theme. Financial success isn't just about being smart, having a high IQ.
Right, not just book smarts.
Exactly. It's much more about how we behave with our money. And that those behaviors are so often rooted in our individual, sometimes, let's face it, irrational perspectives.
Right. Okay, and that brings us neatly to our first key insight. No one's crazy.
Yeah.
The fundamental idea here is that our financial decisions aren't made in a vacuum, are they?
Not at all.
They're deeply influenced by our own unique life experiences, particularly the ones we had, early on.
Definitely.
What might seem like a totally irrational financial move to one person, well, it can actually make perfect sense when you understand their background.
Exactly. Think about someone who grew up during, say, a period of high inflation.
Okay.
Their entire outlook on saving, on borrowing, on investment risk is likely to be fundamentally different from someone who has only ever experienced stable prices.
Right, completely different world.
Those early years really set the baseline for what feels normal, and therefore they powerfully shaped their later financial choices. So for you, maybe consider times in your early life when money felt scarce, or maybe abundant. How might those feelings still be driving your saving or spending habits today, even if the economic reality is different now?
That's a good prompt. And Housel brings in some really interesting research here, doesn't he? He mentions economists Malmendier and Nagel,
Yes.
economists who studied how our early economic experiences really stick with us.
Yeah, their work over decades showed that people's willingness to take investment risk later in life was strongly connected to the macroeconomic conditions they experienced during their formative years.
So someone who came of age during a booming stock market might be much more inclined to invest heavily in stocks later on,
Right.
regardless of the current economic climate almost.
Yeah, it's baked in.
Yeah.
And if we connect this to the bigger picture, it underscores that much of what we consider common sense in finance is actually quite contextual.
Context is key.
Bill Gross, the famous bond manager, even acknowledged that his incredibly successful career benefited massively from a long-term decline in interest rates.
Right, a trend that lasted for decades.
Exactly. His father's generation, though, having lived through periods of high inflation, would have viewed bonds with much more skepticism.
Totally different perspective.
What looked like a fantastic opportunity to Gross might have seemed like a path to, well, eroding wealth to his father.
Wow. It really drives home the point that we've each only witnessed a tiny sliver of financial history, haven't we?
Such a small slice.
Think about the drastically different realities for people in countries like Germany and Japan after World War II, where their economies were just devastated compared to the post-war boom in the U.S., where the stock market flourished. You can't expect someone who lived through that level of economic upheaval to have the same perspective on investing as someone who grew up in a time of, unprecedented prosperity.
Absolutely not. And this understanding extends even to seemingly illogical behaviors, like someone with very limited income buying lottery tickets.
Right, which on paper seems like a terrible financial decision.
It does.
Yeah.
But Housel encourages us to consider the underlying motivation.
Hmm.
For someone who feels like traditional avenues to wealth are completely out of reach,
Yeah.
a lottery ticket might represent the only tangible spark of hope, you know, a chance, however improbable, to dream of a different life.
Hmm. Less about investment, more about hope.
It's less about a rational investment and more about buying a dream when other opportunities just feel non-existent.
That really shifts your perspective, doesn't it? It moves us away from simply labeling someone's choices as crazy
Yeah, less judgment.
and towards trying to understand the personal story, the context that leads to those choices.
Hmm.
It reminds us that financial decisions aren't always purely about logic and spreadsheets. They happen around kitchen tables, in boardrooms, influenced by our individual histories, our egos, our unique ways of seeing the world.
Totally.
I can imagine someone who saw their parents lose their home during a recession might be permanently risk-averse, even in a stable economy. That kind of deep-seated fear must be incredibly hard to shake.
Which leads us perfectly to our second key insight: luck and risk are siblings.
Ah, okay.
This is the critical understanding that outcomes in life, particularly financial success, are often shaped by forces well beyond our individual effort and skill.
Right, not just about hard work.
No, it's about recognizing the significant and, importantly, intertwined roles that both good and bad luck play.
Scott Galloway has a great quote that Housel includes here. Nothing is as good or as bad as it seems.
That's such a good one.
It's a valuable reminder to maintain some humility when things are going exceptionally well,
Uh-huh.
and maybe to avoid being overly critical of ourselves when things take a downturn.
Definitely. Consider Bill Gates' early access to a computer at Lakeside School.
Right, the famous story.
That wasn't solely due to his inherent intelligence and drive. It was a remarkably fortunate opportunity.
Yeah.
Pure luck in many ways.
Yeah, back in 1968, how many high schools had that kind of access?
Exactly. A tiny fraction globally.
Yeah.
That element of chance, just being in the right place at the right time, played a significant role in his future achievements.
And Housel also emphasizes the importance of paying attention to the normal people, doesn't he? Like the historian Frederick Lewis Allen did.
Yes, instead of solely focusing on extreme success stories, the outliers.
We often overlook the impact of broader societal trends and just general circumstances when we become fixated on those, the superstars.
And what's particularly interesting here is the challenge of separating luck from genuine skill. It's really tricky.
How so?
Well, think about Cornelius Vanderbilt's rise. It involved, shall we say, a rather flexible approach to the law.
Ah, okay. Flouting the law, basically.
Pretty much.
Yeah.
While it ultimately worked out for him, letting him build his railroad empire, it's a risky precedent to admire without acknowledging the immense risk he was taking.
Sure.
His story could have very easily had a completely different ending, prison maybe.
Right. The line between bold and reckless often only becomes clear in hindsight, doesn't it?
Exactly. But doesn't that kind of muddy the waters of this luck and risk idea? If someone knowingly takes on huge risks, is the outcome purely luck? Or is there some skill in assessing and navigating those really dangerous situations?
That's a great point. It highlights that luck often favors the bold, perhaps, but boldness without a degree of skill is it's just gambling, isn't it?
Right. And even legendary investors like Benjamin Graham experienced incredibly lucky breaks.
Yeah.
His massive success with Geico stock.
Yeah.
It actually went against his own well-established diversification principles. He put way too much in one basket by his own rules.
Wow. So even the masters get lucky sometimes, or maybe break their own rules.
It makes you wonder, as Graham himself did, can we truly distinguish between a lucky break and an exceptionally shrewd decision in the moment? It's tough.
Very tough. This leads us, though, to a crucial concept you mentioned, the danger of never enough.
Ah, yes. This is powerful. Housel contrasts the stories of Rajat Gupta and Bernie Madoff.
Right. Two infamous examples.
Both achieved immense financial success, right? Huge success. Yet their insatiable desire for more ultimately led them down paths of illegal activity and their eventual downfall.
Tragic, really.
Their stories powerfully illustrate the principle Housel states. There is no reason to risk what you have and need for what you don't have and don't need.
That's a line to remember. It's that constant ratcheting up of expectations, isn't it? The goalpost problem.
Exactly.
As our financial situation improves, our desires tend to escalate even faster, pushing us to take on increasingly greater risks, just to feel like we're keeping pace.
We're getting ahead. And the constant comparison with others, especially now with social media, really fuels this fire.
Oh, definitely.
It perpetually shows us what others possess or appear to possess,
Mhm.
making us feel like we need more to be satisfied.
So the crucial lesson here is learning to recognize when enough is actually enough.
Precisely. It's not about being overly cautious and missing out on potential opportunities necessarily. It's about acknowledging that an insatiable appetite for more can ultimately lead to regret. Huge regret.
Like knowing when to stop eating.
Exactly. Just as we instinctively know when we've eaten too much, we need to cultivate that same sense of limitation when it comes to our financial ambitions before we're forced to stop by burnout or, worse, financial ruin.
Makes you think about those moments in your own life when you felt like you just needed a little bit more. And whether that feeling ever truly goes away or if you just learn to manage it.
Yeah, it's a constant battle for many.
All right, let's move on to our third key insight, which is confounding compounding.
Compounding. The eighth wonder of the world, supposedly.
Right. Now, this is a concept that's frequently discussed in finance, but Housel really digs into why it often feels so counterintuitive.
Yeah, it does, doesn't it?
The core idea is that the power of compounding, that snowball effect of returns, building upon returns, is massively underestimated because our brains are naturally wired to think in a linear fashion, not exponentially.
Exactly. We grasp linear progress much more readily. If I asked you to, I don't know, add 8, 9 times, you could do it pretty quickly in your head.
Yeah, 72. Easy enough.
But I've asked you to multiply 8 by itself 9 times.
Whoa, okay, that's much harder. Need a calculator for that one.
Right. And that's often how compounding feels. The results don't seem intuitively significant until a substantial amount of time has passed. It sneaks up on you.
Warren Buffett serves as the classic illustration here, doesn't he?
The ultimate example.
As Housel points out, the vast majority of Buffett's immense wealth was accumulated after his 50th birthday.
Yeah, something like 95% or more.
And an even larger portion after he turned 65. It wasn't solely about being an exceptional investor, although he obviously is.
Right.
It was about being a consistently good investor for, what, 3/4 of a century?
Incredible duration. Had he started later and retired earlier, like most people,
Yeah.
very few people would likely know his name today. His fortune wouldn't be anywhere near what it is.
So it's the financial equivalent of planting a tiny seed and then waiting. Waiting and waiting.
Oh.
And then suddenly you have this giant oak tree of wealth. Is that the idea?
That's a perfect analogy. And comparing Buffett to someone like Jim Simons,
From Renaissance technologies?
that's the one. Simons has achieved even higher average annual returns with his hedge fund. Phenomenal returns.
Higher than Buffett.
Yes, significantly higher on average. But his net worth is considerably less than Buffett's.
What? Just because he started later. Simply because he found his investment stride later in life and has had less time for those incredible returns to compound.
So time is the magic ingredient.
Time is the multiplier. The theoretical difference over a longer time frame is almost unimaginable.
Housel uses the analogy of the Ice Age, which I found incredibly powerful.
Oh, I loved that one too.
It wasn't necessarily massive, sudden blizzards that created these miles-thick ice sheets, right?
No, it was gradual.
It was the fact that even a small amount of snow, year after year, that didn't completely melt in the summer,
It just kept accumulating.
eventually led to this massive transformation. As the glaciologists put it, it is not necessarily the amount of snow that causes ice sheets, but the fact that snow, however little, lasts.
That really sticks with you. And we see this principle at play in other areas too, like Moore's law in computing.
Right, doubling processor power or storage.
Yeah, the increase in computer storage capacity has far surpassed even the most optimistic initial predictions, all due to that consistent exponential growth. Didn't even Bill Gates kind of miss this initially with Gmail?
He did. Despite his deep understanding of technology, he initially questioned why anyone would need a gigabyte of storage in Gmail.
Which seems tiny now.
Exactly. It just illustrates how quickly exponential growth can surprise even the most astute minds. We're just not built for it intuitively.
So the key takeaway here seems to be the vital importance of patience and a really long-term perspective.
Patience is crucial.
We need to resist the temptation for those quick gains and appreciate that consistent, even if seemingly modest, growth over a long duration can lead to truly extraordinary outcomes.
It's about letting that financial snowball gather momentum as it rolls downhill for decades. not trying to push it too fast.
Okay, that makes sense. Which leads us to our fourth key insight, getting wealthy versus staying wealthy.
Yes, two very different skills.
Housel argues compellingly that these are fundamentally different skill sets, right?
Absolutely. While accumulating wealth might often involve taking calculated risks, being opportunistic, maybe even being aggressive, preserving wealth requires a different and perhaps less glamorous mindset altogether.
How so?
It's one centered on frugality, on defense, and a healthy degree of paranoia even, survival.
Thinking about people you admire financially, maybe famous figures or even people you know. Can you see examples of those who excelled at one but maybe struggled with the other?
Oh, definitely. The contrasting stories Housel uses of Jesse Livermore and Abraham Jermansky from the 1929 stock market crash are a stark illustration.
Right. Tell us about that.
Livermore made billions, literally billions in today's money, by correctly anticipating and shorting the market crash. Genius timing, incredible risk-taking.
Okay, so he got wealthy.
Massively wealthy.
Yeah.
Jermansky, on the other hand, was financially ruined by the same crash.
Okay.
But just a few years later, Livermore, despite his initial spectacular success, made increasingly reckless bets. He couldn't stop. And eventually, he lost everything. Tragically, he ended his own life. Both were clearly skilled at getting wealthy, incredibly so. But neither mastered the crucial art of staying wealthy. They couldn't hold on to it.
Wow. And this isn't just a historical anecdote, is it?
Not at all. Even in today's landscape, Housel points out that a significant percentage of companies that reach the prestigious Forbes 400 list experience considerable turnover over time.
They fall off the list.
Yeah, for reasons other than death or inheritance. It just highlights how fleeting financial success can be if it's not managed with careful consideration for long-term preservation. Survival.
Who embodies that survival mindset?
Michael Moritz of the venture capital firm Sequoia Capital. He emphasizes this survival-oriented mindset. He stresses that their long-term success stems from a constant underlying fear of going out of business.
Really? Fear.
Yeah, a sense that only the paranoid survive. They never rest on their laurels.
That's intense. And the story of Rick Guerin, another one Housel tells?
Ah, yes, the Berkshire Hathaway connection.
He was unfortunately forced to sell his valuable Berkshire Hathaway stock to Warren Buffett during a market downturn, right?
Exactly. Simply because he was over-leveraged. He borrowed too much against his holdings.
So he had the insight to pick a winner.
Clearly. He recognized a great investment early on. But his inability to withstand a temporary storm, a downturn, ultimately cost him dearly.
Because he didn't have that staying power.
He didn't have the cushion. As Buffett himself succinctly put it, with brutal honesty, he brought Rick's Berkshire stock. Ouch.
So the fundamental strategy here is to build a financial plan that has significant room for error.
Yes, that's key. The future is inherently unpredictable. Just think about all the major unforeseen events that have occurred in the last 2 decades alone. Wars, pandemics, financial crises.
The list goes on.
A financial plan that requires everything to go exactly according to plan is an inherently fragile plan. It's brittle.
Needs some flex.
Needs resilience. Just as progress in many areas, even in the complex workings of our own brains, often involves a degree of destruction and pruning.
Like synapses being pruned.
Exactly. Our financial plans need to be resilient enough to withstand inevitable setbacks and continue to grow amidst the inevitable ups and downs, survive the winters.
Livermore himself, reflecting on his failures later, he recognized the danger, didn't he?
He did. He talked about developing a swelled head after his initial successes, that overconfidence that can so easily lead to disastrous decisions when you think you can't lose.
Pride before the fall kind of thing.
Very much so. Getting wealthy is one thing. Staying wealthy requires humility and discipline.
Okay. Finally, let's delve into our fifth key insight. Tails, you win.
Ah, the power of outliers. This is fascinating.
It is. This is the idea that in many fields, particularly business and investing, a small number of exceptional successes, those tails on the far end of the probability distribution,
The big, rare wins.
are what drive the vast majority of the overall results. Failure and mistakes are not only possible, they're often an essential and unavoidable part of the journey.
Yeah, you have to accept the losses to get the wins sometimes. So for someone like you, maybe exploring listeners' area of interest, it sounds like embracing experimentation and not being afraid of some failures is actually a key part of potentially hitting those big wins down the line.
That's a good connection. Give us an example from the book.
Consider Heinz Berggruen, the incredibly successful art dealer Housel mentions.
Okay.
The vast majority of the art he acquired over his career likely turned out to be of relatively little financial value. Maybe duds.
Right.
However, the few iconic Picassos he owned were so incredibly valuable
Astronomical value.
that they more than compensated for all the other pieces combined. He could be wrong the vast majority of the time and still achieve phenomenal success because the wins were so massive.
The tails wag the dog, so to speak.
Exactly. And we see this phenomenon very clearly in the world of venture capital.
Oh, yeah, definitely.
A small percentage of investments generate the overwhelming majority of the returns. One analysis Housel cites showed that while a significant majority of venture-backed companies either failed or just underperformed,
Most don't make it big.
right, but a tiny fraction, around maybe 1%, generated returns of 20 times their initial investment or more. And that's where the entire industry's profits essentially originate. Those few home runs pay for all the strikeouts.
And this isn't limited to niche areas like art or VC, is it?
No, not at all. Even when we look at the broader stock market, like the Russell 3000 index,
It's a big index, yeah.
a significant percentage of companies effectively cease to exist or significantly underperform over time. They just fade away or go bust.
Lots of failures baked in.
Totally. Yet, the spectacular performance of a smaller group of winners, think Microsoft, Amazon, Apple, companies like that,
A giant.
more than offsets all those losses,
Right.
leading to impressive overall market returns for long-term investors who just hold the index.
So this has a pretty significant implication for how we should approach our own financial lives, doesn't it?
Huge implications. Most of the time, the day-to-day decisions, the small fluctuations, might not seem all that critical in the grand scheme of things.
Okay.
But what truly matters, Housel argues, is how we behave during those rare but significant periods, likely just 1% of the time or even less, when everyone else might be panicking or making emotionally driven, irrational decisions.
Like during a market crash.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Hold on. Can you maybe even buy when others are fearful? That's where the tail opportunities might lie for individuals.
Peter Lynch, the legendary investor, he famously said something about this, right? About not being right all the time.
He did. He said that even the most successful investors are only right about 6 out of every 10 investment decisions, maybe even less.
Only 60%. That's surprising.
It is. It's not about striving for perfection or avoiding all mistakes. That's impossible.
So what is it about?
It's about how much you stand to gain when you're right and how much you stand to lose when you're wrong. George Soros put it brilliantly.
What did he say?
Something like, it's not whether you're right or wrong that's important, but how much money you make when you're right and how much you lose when you're wrong.
Asymmetric bets. Big wins, small losses.
Exactly. You can be wrong a significant portion of the time and still build substantial wealth if your wins are large enough and your losses are effectively managed and contained. Cut your losers, let your winners run.
Even prominent business leaders like Jeff Bezos at Amazon and Reed Hastings at Netflix seem to embrace this tails you win philosophy openly.
They do. They accept that significant failures, think Fire Phone for Amazon,
Right. Big flop.
are an inevitable and even necessary part of the process for achieving massive successes like Amazon Web Services or hit shows like, Stranger Things or The Crown for Netflix.
Do they expect failure?
They actively foster a culture that encourages risk-taking, fully understanding that a few truly transformative wins can more than compensate for numerous smaller losses or experiments that don't pan out.
Yeah.
Hastings even said he wanted a higher cancellation rate for shows at one point.
Really?
To signal that they weren't taking enough risks. He wanted more bold bets, even if more failed, hoping for those huge tail successes.
Like a comedian testing jokes.
Perfect analogy.
Yeah.
Like Chris Rock testing out new jokes in small clubs, most might fall flat. But the truly successful ones that make it to the special, those are the tales that emerge from many, many attempts.
So the crucial takeaway here is what? Accept failure.
Yeah, pretty much. Except that failure and mistakes are an inherent part of the process of striving for significant success. Focus on positioning yourself to potentially capture those rare but highly impactful tail events.
Okay.
And try not to get too discouraged by the inevitable setbacks and smaller losses along the way. It's about developing the resilience to keep experimenting
Keep trying.
and the wisdom to recognize and maybe even double down on those exceptional opportunities when they arise.
So as we wrap up this deep dive then, we've explored some really fundamental, almost philosophical ideas from Morgan Housel's The Psychology of Money.
Yeah, it goes way beyond just numbers.
We've seen how our personal histories deeply influence our financial perspectives.
No.
making crazy behavior understandable.
Right. No one's crazy.
The crucial and often intertwined roles of both luck and risk in shaping our outcomes. They're siblings.
Can't separate them easily.
The remarkable and often underestimated power of compounding over the long term.
Patience pays.
The distinct and equally important skills required for both getting wealthy and staying wealthy. Survival matters.
Gotta keep it.
And finally, the outsized impact of those infrequent but significant tail events, the outlier.
Where the real action often is.
And for you, listening, as someone who enjoys learning and understanding new ideas, this gives you a really valuable framework, I think, for looking at recognizing these often subtle nuances, these psychological quirks, can empower you to make more informed, maybe more emotionally resilient, and ultimately, hopefully, more successful financial decisions going forward.
Well said. Understanding the psychology is half the battle, maybe more.
And on that note, here's a final thought for you to consider, just to mull over.
Okay.
Think about your own earliest memories and experiences with money. Maybe things your parents taught you or situations you observed growing up. How might those experiences be subtly, perhaps even unconsciously, shaping your current financial behaviors and decisions today?
Deep question.
And could consciously taking some time to reevaluate those early influences, maybe questioning some assumptions you didn't even know you had, could that potentially unlock new and more positive possibilities for your financial future?
Something definitely worth reflecting on.
Food for thought. Thanks for joining us on this deep dive.
Thank you for joining us at Wisdom House, where we bring you timeless insights from the greatest books. If you found this deep dive valuable, don't forget to like, comment, share, and subscribe to Wisdom House. Stay curious, stay inspired, and we'll see you in the next